In a move that seemed to be a complete defiance of the stigma attached to rural areas, we are witnessing huge interest by individuals who want to go and set up their homesteads in the rural communities. What has changed? My name is William Chingombe, affectionately known as the Country Boy, and this is Africa Re-Konexion. My guest today is Linda Gabrielle, and it's a pleasure to have her on this show. She's going to help us allay all the fears that we might be having in migrating from urban to rural. Thank you very much for being here, Linda. You are a poet, an environmentalist, an artist, a permaculture designer, and a mother. How do you actually juggle around the demands of all those roles?
I think it's within us as women. Mm-hmm. Our grandmothers or mothers, women before us, they will raise children, go to work the fields. Some were midwives, some were healers, participate at church. So I think you're born with it. You're born with it, and for me, they all come natural. But farming or moving to live in the village kind of prepared me for motherhood. You know, when you work the land, you're supposed to be patient. You get frustrated, you go back. And it's the same things I'm experiencing now as a mother. So farming kind of paved the way for motherhood.
Mm-hmm. I know the work of a poet, the work of an environmentalist, mother. But what does a permaculture designer do?
So basically, permaculture comes from two words, permanent agriculture. Mm-hmm. What we're doing is we're saying, whatever you're doing, let it be permanent. So you're opposing the conventional agricultural ways that people are used to, where they were doing monocropping. You're actually coming in and doing intercropping and also observing and learning from the environment, from the land. So whatever systems we put into place, they're supposed to be permanent. Mm-hmm. That's why you find after 3-4 years, you get to a space of zero tillage or no digging, because whatever you've been doing in the past years allows you to get to a point where the work that you do becomes permanent. You're looking at how do I create solutions. For instance, if you're living on a wetland, what permanent structures do you put in for your farming to be easy? So basically permanent is you're saying you are responsible for the environment. Mm-hmm. You are observing from nature, and you are, like in the space we are now, we are supposed to be healing the ecosystem. We're supposed to be nurturing. We're supposed to be planting more trees, trying to strive to go back to, let's just say, you know, in biblical terms, Garden of Eden, where things worked in harmony, people, plants, animals, where everything was sort of like perfect. So we're trying. So when you design, you observe the land and know the kind of vegetable garden beds that I'm going to do here. They will be shaped in this way. Where does your water flow from? Where do you experience runoff? So what is it that you're putting in place? So you no longer just place elements. Elements are placed in relation to each other. Where do you go more often on the yard? Where does it need... for instance, beehives, you wouldn't put them closer to your kitchen because they don't need maintenance compared to a herbal garden. So everything starts by looking at the land, then starting to place materials or resources in relation to each other. So permaculture is quite varied because everything works with each other. So it's not somebody just doing cows or goats. If you're doing goats, what else are you doing? What else is there? What else can you do? So we're big on recycling, reusing, and reducing, and everything in your environment matters before you've even before you call it waste. So basically, that's permaculture designing.
Yeah, and why the need to oppose conventional methods now?
So I will keep on talking about bees because you also understand bees. So when you come with a pesticide and you spray, let's just say 30 hectares of maize, what you have done, as much as you have curbed the disease that's affecting your maize, you have also disturbed some living organisms within the environment. Hence nowadays, if you are to look even at a normal homestead, you might not find a lizard. When was the last time you saw a butterfly? It's all these things that we do whilst we are dealing with wanting a good harvest from our maize. In the process, we are also killing living organisms within the environment. So you find the number of bees is depleting. Different things you cannot see them. But when we try to live in harmony, then we are also creating biodiversity. If the world was just supposed to live as maize on its own, tobacco on its own, but we know just from observing masango or the bushes, you will see bigger trees, shrubby ones, grasses, all these live in harmony with each other. So in permaculture designing, we're saying you're observing and learning from nature and see as a human being, how do I better the environment? How do I cause less harm? Because a lizard will eat some flies or some bugs naturally. That's how they survive. So when you're doing that, pesticides, you reduce pesticides if you are inviting, I call them friends of the environment. So if you've got your lizards, even if snakes who come at your farm, they will eat your rats, right? So it's not just a matter of killing snakes when you see them. They're actually coming. And wherever you see these things, it means there's also life. A snake will not come in a place where there is no life. It's coming there because there's food for it. But what we've done over the years is we have disturbed living mechanisms to a point where snakes no longer have food in the forest. So then they would rather come at the homestead because that's the next place that they can get food. But imagine if we are doing regenerative agriculture, where bushes, where we are not cutting many trees down. They won't even bother us. They will have enough food on their own without coming to disturb our homesteads.
I would imagine that process is not an overnight one. And when you look at the conventional methods, it's always,
quick
and immediate results. And this one takes a longer process to achieve. Is it viable to go that route?
So for me, if you've been following my work, my focus has been food security at household level. So I want you to think of this as a smallholder farmer living in the village. Maybe you've got 2 hectares of land. Before you've even thought of going commercial, just growing cabbages. What is it that you're doing at your homestead? Because most of these smallholder farmers, they grow cabbage, they sell it at Mbare Musika. Then from Mbare Musika, then they buy tomatoes and onions to take home. But what if you are doing all this at your homestead before you even thought of commercial? So for me, the idea is, because organic requires you to be patient. Organic requires a lot of resources if you are starting. So I wouldn't advise a commercial farmer who has 300 hectares of land, unless if they go commercial, mechanized, smart, climate smart agriculture. That way it might work. But where we are at now, looking at Zimbabwe, my advice is, what is it that you're doing at your own backyard? Because we all have backyards and we all have small pieces of land in our villages with our friends, with our cousins. But on that piece of land, that's what I'm saying, have you exhausted corner to corner? So it's a lot of work. It's also things that you have to be very passionate about, and you have to be living on the land to actually know, okay, so 3 years ago I planted bananas, right? It's only this year that they've started giving us fruits. So you are investing in the longer run. It might be things that my grandchildren might enjoy, but I'm doing the right things now at my village, at my homestead. So now my son can actually pick a banana. So I know, okay, around this time, money that I was using to buy bananas, I'm saving it for something else. So even soil improvements, you just don't wake up and say, my whole 1 acre, I have improved, because it's continuous work. So you work in bits and pieces. You are composting, you are making liquid manure, you are mulching. So even if you come on my land, you will notice the different types of soils that I have. You can tell the rich ones, you can tell the ones that still need more work. So we've been working in bits and pieces. But in 2019, I thought, in a year's time, my place will be lush. It will be a food forest. I'll have everything. But then I discovered I'm sitting on a wetland. So second year, rains were a lot. I lost everything. I have to restart again. So it requires you to be very patient. But if you are in my shoes, you understand where I'm going. It's not just for me. I live my talk. So it begins with me to my son, to his children. So it's viable on a homestead level. Look at people who are living, let's say, in Borodale or in Highlands or Chisipiti. They have access to water. They have maybe, they're sitting on an acre piece of land. Why should you be buying vegetables from the supermarkets? You can easily do that in your backyard if you start doing the right things. So on a household level, and also improving nutrition, you are accessing fresh foods, fresh organic foods from your garden. You are constantly drinking herbal tea and cooking with fresh herbs. So these are things that matter to me. It's narrowing it down to household level. So I will never talk about commercial. When you hear me talking about commercial, it's totally a different story. But my focus is a grandmother in Zimba. Can she do more with her land to feed her 6 grandchildren? What is a single mother doing with 3 kids and an idle land from her grandparents? What is a family of 4 doing? Or can they not do Fumvudza? Can they not do, 4 or 5 beehives? They can start having their own honey, make a bit of soap and, a bit of some candles. So that's my angle. So when I talk about what I do, it comes down to individuals. It comes down to one homestead at a time.
So what are some of the works that you're doing in your own small space to make sure that you impact households with this wonderful concept?
The work that I do, you want to see it for you to believe it. When you tell someone that, no, in just one vegetable garden, 1 meter by 4 meter, you can grow carrots, you can grow cover, you can have onions, you can have basil, you can have chili in there. Because where we are at, it's mindset shifting. My father was like, you've been eating vegetables for the last 30 years from the same garden, right? So what is it that you're talking about? Then I'm saying, I'm talking about doing it better and harvesting more and getting surplus. So it's only when you do it. So in the last 3 years, I've just been designing my home to become that model where if I'm to teach, I'm teaching from something tangible. When I say those are raised beds and they are permanent, this is what we are doing. So I'm at a point now, like 2 weeks ago, we launched a project called Mafiwa. It's for community women to come learn permaculture and sustainable farming practices. They're setting up their home gardens on my plot because currently I'm among the few who have got a borehole in my area. So this is what we're doing. So as much as it's my land, it's basically a community space where women come to work. Look, this is an acre. My neighbors, when we're doing this work, there is no way they'll say, you're making too much noise with your group of 16 women, and where in the urban areas do you get 1 acre to actually give out to say, okay, I'll have 16 families come here and work? You know what I mean? I mean, at my mom's house, we have a small garden that could be maybe less than 10 meters by 4. So you can't even invite neighbors to come work. This is the exciting or fulfilling part of the work that I do. Women coming together and producing food for their families.
You decided to unplug yourself from the city, go and stay in the rural areas.
Yes.
Tell us about that transition. But before that, I think maybe to give us a bit of your background so that we understand how harsh that transition was for you.
So for me, it wasn't harsh. But for people who know me, look, when I was 21, I left for South Africa. When I was 24, I left South Africa. I went to Malawi. I did 2 years in Malawi. I came home for 6 months, went back to South Africa. From South Africa, I ended up in Germany. So I've been always globetrotting. So for them to actually believe that Linda is You know, when people see me, when did you come back? I'm like, yesterday. Because I've always been known to be going from one place to another. And I love traveling. So even my parents could not fathom, you know, the idea that rural without the experience. But before I said I'm going to look for a place to stay in Zim, I had started my permaculture design way. You know, I was already on that path where I was learning quite a lot when I was in Berlin, and I did an internship. Then I went to Mozambique to qualify for my permaculture design certificate. And so coming back, I was like working on like 200 kilometers on an hour, kind of. That's the speed I was in. I was full of energy because things I had started learning and discovering at school, I was like, my grandmother used to do that. My grandmother used to do that. There's nothing new here. But the thing with these things is we put makeup on them. Then we sell them back to you. And when we sell them back to you, we have an English name for them. It's permaculture design. And you're thinking there's, you know, but then when you look at it, what it does is it simply opens your eyes to say, go back to the ways of your people.
The basics.
Go back to your basics. By the time you learn about, for instance, the concept of companion planting, we call it Three Sisters concept, where you have maize, beans, and pumpkins. But that's what our grandmothers used to do. You know, so I had to...
They just didn't have a scientific term for
exactly,
it.
But travel to the other side, learn about it and bring it back home. Like, no, I'm not bringing it back home. This was always ours. So even you see, even with when our grandfathers had a large herd of cattle, they knew this year they are in this plot and the manure there is, you know, fertilizing the land. Next year when they moved the herd, then they'll crop here. So they were already living with livestock and doing the best out of it. Believe you me, we didn't have synthetic chemicals and fertilizers then, but our people had, you know, like amazing health. My grandmother, my mother's mom lived up to 98. You know, so exotic foods are introduced to us, and we abandon our indigenous food. You know, we abandon rapoko, munga, jio, you know, millet, which were very nutritious, high in fiber, and we're not doing that. So what permaculture designing has done for me, it is, child, go back, interrogate, question, what is it that your people used to do? You know, now we talk of post-harvest losses. Back then, our grandmothers would make their own biltong. You know, chimukuyu, you know, they would dig holes in the ground, put wood ash and a bit of sand, and then they'll store their sweet potatoes. Then in the kitchen with the smoke, they will harvest the ripened seeds and they'll save them. Exactly, because they know chingai or smoke will not deters bugs. So they had all these ways, but all that information has been lost, and it's what we are going back to indigenous knowledge systems to find out what worked in Binga, because what worked in Binga might not necessarily work in Mashonaland West, and might not work when we go east or when we go north. So it's community to community. What is it that worked? Our soils are different. What is it that we could be doing? Then we enhance from there. Now we must make use of the current technologies to actually say, okay, now they didn't have this, now we can have this. You know, so like for the past 5 years, I don't have a refrigerator. So what do? I ask women in the village, how do you store this? What do you do with this? And life has been good.
Okay. Is it working?
It's working. Look at me. You know, when people look at me and I said, and I live in the village, they're like, you lying. You know, but look.
Yeah.
You wake up to birds chirping, different kinds of calls. That it's interesting when my uncles who are tour guides visit, but then they can tell you from each bird call that that's this bird, that's this bird. But when I've lived in my mom's house in Norton, you now you're like, does this country still have birds? And maybe you find the ones with black or white chests, those are very common. But the other ones, like at home we have a kue, I don't know the English name, but it goes kue. quack, quack, you know, and that's fascinating. And these are the sounds that my son is growing up with, you know. Mama, I'm like, where? Like, quack, quack.
And how have you been able to, you know, assimilate with rural communities there?
So for me, I think it comes naturally that I'm a people's person. So you greet, you share a joke, you introduce yourself. But what I've also done is I'm in good books with my village head. Vanasa buku wangu, you know, I'm known. But also when I come to the community, I'm known that I'm not just coming as Linda, but I'm also coming with gifts that aid the community. So we wouldn't want a young person who's opening up their compound to say, hey, women can come and work, you know. So it's exciting, but at the same time, we're still, you know, living in patriarchal societies where sometimes I'm not happy with meetings when they're done because it's a whole lot of men and less representative from women. But these are things that we deal with on a day-to-day basic. Then there's some who think Nemar, so they call me Murungu, Murungu, Murungu. You know?
It's always the case, especially when you are in the place for the very first time and you seem to be doing things that are progressive. People will always look at you from an economic perspective.
Which also, like for me, besides having local women come and work, I also have an apprenticeship program for young women from less privileged backgrounds. And I've been going back to Norton because this is charity begins at home. So I have a few girls who come to me, stay with me for a year or two. The one who stayed with us longer, she did 4 years with us. But they are learning sustainable ways. They are learning permaculture. And what we then do with this program is when we win you off, you go to a place where we say, this is yours. So we also buy a one-piece acre of land, build a 2-roomed cottage, set up an income-generating project. So my youngest is 17. She already has her own musha, you know. So when you do that, then you're creating also employment. There are people who come and clear where the house has to build. There are people who come to actually build. There are people who come to fence. So you're also creating employment in some way for many families. So when you're coming in, I think I'm at a space where I am a good stakeholder within my neighborhood. So when people see me, they're like, don't you have another student who needs a piece of land? Don't you have, you know, things going on? Yeah.
So does that program also extend to young men, or this is just an empowerment targeted at women only?
So that specifically has been for young women. But with my work, we've been doing workshops for the youth. I would like to get to a point where we alternate. So, for instance, if I have 3 months girls, I want 3 months boys to come in. Because what we've been doing in the space of women empowerment is we've been leaving a huge gap between the boys. You know, so the way I'm raising my son, I want almost another son to have that experience, that, you know, gender roles, you know, to look at equity, to look at equality, to look at empowerment for both, because women don't function as women alone in their society. So even if we're empowering young girls, at some point we need to be also looking at young boys. But what happens is, to do all this work, you also have to have resources, right? Yes. So I'll tell you, for instance, the students that live in my house, they actually live in my house. So it's not like I have a boarding school or anything. So I have 2 bedrooms that they can share. So imagine if I have more boys, then I don't have space for them, because now I've said during holidays, they can go. That's when I can also entertain visitors, because now I'm like, my girls are using my house, you know. So if I have enough resources, believe you me, I would actually quit on women empowerment and just deal with boys.
Okay.
We haven't done enough for the boy child. We haven't done work to actually say, for them to understand that a woman should not be abused. We haven't done that, but we have taught the girls that they should not be abused by boys. So some of these conversations, they need both genders in the same space, you know.
And I'm glad that you're also raising a son, so your perception also is also then aligned.
And you know, before I even had him,
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a poem in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And my prayer since then has been, bless me with a son.
Mm-hmm. And it happened.
And it happened. No, I prayed hard for that one. Prayer answered. Because the whole thing for me is I've experienced a generation and generations of bad men. You know, I was raised by my mom alone. You know, so already there's absent fatherism there going on. And I want my son to be better. You know, I want my son to be responsible. That if you're going to have a child somewhere, at least be there for that child, even if you part ways with the mother. I want that. And I think it starts with me in saying, child, this, not here. Because if I do that with him, then he's going to be a responsible someone out there. So if you look at him by now, he's already 2, but he knows that this is around sunset. We're supposed to be feeding ducks. There is a hose pipe there. I need to change it to put it on. So he has these concepts of knowing you can feed the ducks. If you spill your juice, you're supposed to mop that. So this is in me also just trying. If I can't change the world, at least there should be one. You know, I want to be remembered as that Amwene, you know, mother-in-law who raised one heck of a beautiful son.
Beautiful son. There's always this stigma, you know, about rural areas being places of pain and suffering. Even the way we used to produce our food, you know, we were not mechanized then. Do you think there are legitimate reasons for somebody to think of migrating from the urban cities to the rural areas?
I think COVID sort of like opened our eyes. When people lost jobs in urban areas, what did they do? They went back to the village. And this is where we saw a number of people starting their vegetable gardens and selling vegetables. During COVID time, vegetables were expensive. So what it's simply saying is stay where you are, grow as much as you can, and see what happens from there. Because look, if a household is doing the most from their piece of land, and the neighbor is doing that, and another neighbor is doing that, I'll give you, for example, in my space we butter. A neighbor has cows, and I have chicken layers. So I'll say a crate of eggs to some milk, right? If it's not milk, then I'm also getting cow dung for my fields. So we are buttering. And if it's done in an organized way, we can actually say, you plant cabbages, we do a lot of carrots. He does beetroot. When it's harvest time, we are just swapping one head of cabbage, maybe 4 or 5 bundles of this, and another person is doing that. So we can all eat a green salad within the community. So what has happened also, I've seen with a number of podcasts and content creators who are also showcasing beautiful homes that have been developed. We are at that time where you move from your, pit latrine toilet and you do a toilet sit. You know what I'm saying? Because you can, right? But the beauty also of being out in the village is the amount of fresh air that you get just from the trees. The quiet, serene moments you can sit on your own. Look, in towns, your neighbor is playing this musician, your other neighbor is playing that. So it depends. If you go on this side of the house, there is that. So all those noises as well. And for me as an artist, there was no way I could have saved enough to buy land and build in an urban setup and do all these things that I'm doing. You know, if you were renting, if your landlord sees you with a beautiful garden, then like, oh, you're using a lot of my water, rent goes up. Or the next thing, they will tell you are evicted because my son from the UK is returning and he needs to use that cottage. You know, and I think when you've also lived abroad, you will know what land means. You will know the value and importance of land. Land is what we can leave to our children. You can leave them a car right now. The minute they get out, an accident happens, and a lot of cars in Zimbabwe, they are not insured. So that inheritance has already been wasted. But if it's designed in a way that my son is doing whatever we're doing on the farm, even in my absence, he's able to know that I need to feed the ducks. Even when I'm gone, if he chooses to live on the farm, will know that that farm will thrive. So for me, if there is advice I'll give to anyone young, go back to your father's people. Go back to your sekurus, ask for a piece of land, build a cottage. The good thing about these days is you can have a jacuzzi in
the rural areas.
Exactly. I will give you an example of Jinimbi, who built a world-class house in Domboshava. But 10 years ago, when we talked about Domboshava, Seke, rural, we'll be like, Kuma Ruzeva, Kuma Musha would be frowning, right? But look at how many people. And what then happens is, I've noticed this, when people visit me or when my friends come through, they don't want to go back. I'm like, guys, it's 6 p.m. I need to, But that's because the environment itself allows you to breathe, allows you to be at peace. Harare is busy. Harare is noisy. It's hectic. And at the end of the day, whatever people are trying to do is put food on their table. So I'm saying, yard to table, put food first on your table and see if you really need to go to work. Going to work might actually be supplementing. Look at it this way. I only pay my taxes with the Zimba District Council. This is like $46 for the last 4 years. I have my own bowl. At some point, I need to start paying taxes to the water board as well. But it's different when you are renting. You have to be paying rent all the time. You have to be paying for electricity. That's rarely there. Then you have to be paying for water bills. And all these things, these are things when I look at myself as an artist. And if you look at the arts industry in Zimbabwe, as a poet, how many gigs do I need to be performing to be able to afford the lifestyle I have now? I have it now. Like, look, I can wake up in the morning and pick strawberries from my garden and add to my porridge remunga and say, this is breakfast. I can decide to have spinach on my bread and toast for breakfast because I can. But if you are buying, as long as you're buying vegetables, you are buying according to how much you have in your pocket. So you can have $1, you only get 5 leaves. Whereas if you are at home, you don't even think about that. You think, okay, if I'm to pluck 10 leaves, do I finish? Okay, let me do 8, right? But it's different when you are buying. It's against the pocket all the time. So I'm thinking, if you're an artist, if you have kumusha kwana sekuru wako, you're not performing all the time. And this is a better space to set up your instruments for rehearsals, where you really don't make noise for other people and you can just wake up from your house, cross over to your studio and get work done.
But how then do you deal with the negative perceptions that then come with people saying, Kumusha Adona, and lifestyle has really gone down for him, and so forth.
That's why I say mindset shifting. We've been made to believe that moving to the towns, you have made it. But look, I'm saying, in the town, you are renting a bachelor pad in the avenues in Harare. You can only have your bed and, But I'm saying, I live on an acre, 4,000 square meters of land. I have trees, I've got beehives, I've got vegetables. So, akapera ndiani between you and me. And the thing is, I also don't allow negative energy in my space to people who have been negative. I'm just like, good riddance, So you find my circle or my network. It's also people who've got projects, people who are building kumisha kwamo, people who are doing stuff on the ground, people who love the garden. You and me have got nothing to talk about if we cannot talk about bees. When you have a conversation with me, at some point, permaculture will come into play, growing food will come into play, all these things, right? So at some point, your friends are weaned off naturally by saying, okay, they're not really interested. They still just want to be an artist. I'm like, it's okay. So who do I have? I have a few artists who are also doing farming, and they've decided to say, okay, we come to Harare for exhibitions, we come to Harare for entertainment, and we go back in our own spaces. So now it's also time for our own people to open their eyes and say, what does the term apera mean? Chichinonzu kupera. You know what I mean? I'm asking, if you're 39, what's your wealth? I'm like, I've got a piece of land, I've got water, I've got gardens. What do we have for sure? You might be having a car, you might be having an iPhone, but at the end of the day, do you go to bed at peace saying, I've put in 10 plants of tomatoes and I cannot wait to harvest? That's my kind of happiness. I'm looking for this herb, I need to add that, I'm looking for this. So at some point you just find your kin, and your kin finds you, people who are aligning with what you're doing and where we are going. So now, amongst the farmers, when I've lost 10 cows or maybe 10 goats, but as long as you're living in the urban and you're 39 years old, you cannot tell me kutinda pera.
Indeed. I've also discovered that a lot of people who are actually embracing the idea of going back to the rural areas are people who are either coming from the diaspora or who don't have a history with rural communities, and they've been staying in the cities, and they are kind of fed up with the city, and they are looking at retreating to the rural areas so that they can have a renewed life. And I don't know why, because a lot of people who actually grew up in the rural areas, they don't want to hear about rural areas going back there. I guess it's the stigma that we talked about.
It's the stigma and also the upbringing, So look, I'm doing permanent raised beds. My son is 2. He can actually work in them standing. So work is little, He's not going to wake up at 4 a.m., walk 4-5 kilometers to school. No, he's not going to do that. Whilst we're at home, he still can afford pancakes with strawberries, right? So I think it's that as well. When people think about kumusha, it's also because out of poverty, they think of reliving, the experience that they grew up on, right? But look at it now. We wait for us to be diabetic, to go back to eating bonongwe, amaranth, mutsine, blackjack, because they've been prescribed. My son, as we're saying, he already eats these things. So he knows, he's a farm boy. But whilst he knows muruone, dovi, tsunga, and everything else, this is his basic. And this is like, okay, my mom makes these things fancy, So I think it's to do that. But I also want to speak to those who had harsh upbringing within the villages, that they could go back, set up what they think is beautiful, then make those their holiday homes to go back to. Also, at the same time, let's not wait for retirement, whatever people call retirement, to then say, I'll build kumusha, So I understand if some people are still thinking, living in the village is backwards. But it's also like, look, if you haven't upgraded your village, it will always be backwards. If you're not going to put in some solar, if you're not going to, to change the pit latrines where a person like me always have to be walking sideways to get in there, where already I'm thinking, okay, I will help myself when I get back to my place. So you also have to think of that. I'm thinking of my mother. I'm thinking of my friends from abroad when they visit. So if we need to start designing and looking at ways of changing the face. Let's make kumusha sexy,
Very habitable. Thank you very much, Linda, for coming through. And before we just wrap it up, we always want to glean on the African wisdom, the wealth of wisdom we have here in Africa. And if you have a proverb or an African nugget that you want to share with us before we close.
It takes a village to raise a child. I've been a living testimony of that, and it's exactly what's happening to my son as well. When I've done projects, people come through to support me. Even my upbringing, strangers would come through and help pay for my tuition, and currently the literal part of it is I live in the village and I can let my son play with the neighbors. When they see that he's hungry, they feed him and he comes back to me. So when it takes a village to raise a child, I think I think this is the reason why I'm also in the village setup. Urban setups, you cannot trust your neighbor with your child. things have changed, right? But in this space, we are allowing our children to be everybody's child. So they know all my neighbors, they are my in-laws because they have daughters. They can, care for my child in my absence, or when I'm just, fed up with him in a day, I'm like, go to my neighbors, play with their children.
outside.
And their children can also come to me and I'm like, guys, I need all these strawberries gone. Make sure. So they sit in the garden and they eat as much strawberries as they want. So it's, I am a living testimony of being raised by a village. And my son is also another living testimony. So it takes, there's nowhere we go without the aid of others. And this is us as a people, as Africans. Ubuntu goes back to your child is my child, So yeah, it
Indeed.
takes a village.
Linda Gabriel, thank you very much for being on our show today. And I hope and trust that the vision that you have will also, be replicated in many places, rural communities rather.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for allowing my story and my voice to be heard.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us on Africa Re-Konexion, and we wrap it up here. Linda Gabriel has been my guest. Until we meet again next time, keep it rural.